Before we begin, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. The City of Berkeley recognizes that the community we live in was built on the territory of the Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, the ancestors and descendants of the sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to all of the Ohlone tribes and descendants of the Verona Band. As we begin our webinar, we acknowledge and honor the original inhabitants of Berkeley, the documented 5,000-year history of a vibrant community at the West Berkeley Shell Mound, and the Ohlone people who continue to reside in the East Bay. We recognize that Berkeley's residents have and continue to benefit from the use and occupation of this unceded stolen land since the City of Berkeley's incorporation in 1878. As stewards of the laws regulating the City of Berkeley, it is not only vital that we recognize the history of this land, but also recognize that the Ohlone people are present members of Berkeley and other East Bay communities today. The City of Berkeley will continue to build relationships with the Lejeune tribe and to create meaningful actions that uphold the intention of this land acknowledgement. Okay, so for tonight's agenda, I'll quickly take us through what we're going to talk about. First, I'll be giving a civic arts overview in case anyone attending is new to civic arts and what we do. I'll go over some important dates for the grant cycle, talk about this program's specific details, including the eligibility and program requirements. We'll talk about the application process, application elements, the things that you'll include in your application, and then we'll go through a short submittable tutorial. Submittable is what we use as our grants management system and the system you'll use to apply. We'll talk about the review process of your application and the review criteria and scoring scale that will be used by our grant review panelist to adjudicate your application, and go over some general grant writing tips, how you can get help with your application through technical assistance. And then at the end of this presentation will be a question and answer session. As we go through the program, as you think of questions, feel free to put them in the question and answer box, and that's denoted by the Q&A image at the bottom of your Zoom window. But otherwise, I can also answer any questions verbally. You can use the raise your hand feature. But if you're thinking of something and don't want to lose it, you feel free to put things in the Q&A box as we speak. I do ask that you keep your questions general. If you have very specific questions that are unique to your organization or the specific project you're thinking of, I will give you some ways that you can contact me individually, and we can talk about that a little bit more in depth. Otherwise, feel free to ask any questions at the end. Okay, so our mission at Civic Arts is to support a culturally vibrant and diverse arts ecosystem within the City of Berkeley. And we do that in several ways. Funding artists, nonprofit organizations, and festivals through our grants program is one of the ways we fulfill that mission. We also have a robust public art program, provide access to arts and cultural experiences for residents and visitors of Berkeley. And just this year, or last year, I should say, we started offering another program, which is Berkeley's Poet Laureate program. And we operate that program in partnership with the Berkeley Public Library. And it just had its inaugural run this past year. So we have a new Poet Laureate for 2024, and they will have a 2-year service term. On the right side of the slide, you will see Civic Arts cultural equity statement. But I always like to talk about some concrete ways that the grants program is fulfilling that cultural equity statement and committed to making the program more equitable. Last year, we increased the cultural equity review criterion and the percentage of that criterion in our guidelines, and also refined the language of that criterion. We've started offering translation services for our guidelines and application. And if you need to submit your application in a different language, we would be able to translate that into English for you so our panelists can evaluate it. Our grant program guidelines have been reviewed by the city's Disability Services Program for accessibility. We've recruited a larger review panelist pool to adjudicate our applications, and we continue to prioritize Black, Indigenous, and people of color as our grant review panelists. We continue to do some targeted outreach to make sure that communities and folks that normally haven't been involved with our grant program in the past know that we have these grant opportunities. And then the final way is creating this arts programs grant. And with this grant, we're really hoping to reach new audiences, new communities, new organizations with our grants program that we haven't in the past, making a special grant program that's dedicated to that. Grant applications are now open, and the deadline to apply is March 13th at 11:59 p.m. And I always try to remind folks that even though the deadline is 11:59 p.m., I do not work until 11:59 p.m. on the day of the deadline. So just keep in mind that staff won't be available after about 4:30 to answer any questions on that deadline day. Grant review panelists will score all of the applications March through April, and then we'll schedule a grant review panel meeting that will be virtual in May. And all applicants will be notified about the day and the time of that grant review meeting, the grant panel review meeting, excuse me. It is a public meeting, so you can attend that if you would like. The grant subcommittee will meet on June 6th to discuss the funding scenarios of, all of the applications that have been adjudicated. And those funding scenarios are then brought to the Civic Arts Commission meeting in June to approve the awards. And nothing is technically final until the council approves our grants budget for fiscal year 2025. So that's why we wait until July, the beginning of July, to notify applicants of whether or not they've been awarded or declined, because we need to wait until that June 25th council meeting that we know how much money we can grant. So as I mentioned earlier, this is a brand new grant category, and for this grant category, you can request up to $5,000 for your program related expenses. And there's very specific eligibility for this grant category as we try to reach those new organizations and new residents of Berkeley with our grant funds. So the purpose of this arts program grant is to support arts and cultural programming within the city of Berkeley that fall into one of two categories. So the first one is non-arts nonprofit organizations. So any nonprofit organization that is not an arts and cultural organization. So those non-arts nonprofit organizations located within the city of Berkeley limits that want to produce an arts and cultural program and that would happen in the city of Berkeley. But those non-arts nonprofit would need to partner with an arts organization or a teaching artist or another type of creative worker to produce those or to produce that program. The other type of eligibility for this grant program is for arts nonprofits. So organizations that are already producing arts programming, but are located outside of Berkeley, but want to produce their programming in Berkeley, like using a specific venue or working with a specific community or population within the city of Berkeley. And I will repeat this. I know it is kind of complicated, the eligibility requirements. So I will go over that again. But this funding opportunity aims to do two things. One, allow cross-sector collaborations and opportunities for non-arts organizations to hire arts workers or partner with Berkeley-based arts organizations. And two, allow Berkeley residents to engage in the programming offered by arts organizations that may be outside of Berkeley. I do want to note before we move on that this is a pilot program and funded in part with a grant that Civic Arts received from the National Endowment for the Arts. So this is something we're trying and it may or may not be offered in the future. So just wanted to give you all a heads up about that. So again, for eligibility, you've got to be like a social service nonprofit organization located in Berkeley, that you're applying for funds to do arts programming in Berkeley, or you're an arts nonprofit in the Greater Bay Area, but not in Berkeley, that you want to bring your programming to the Berkeley city limits. The other part of eligibility for this grant is that the applicant organization must be a 501c3 federally tax exempt organization. That is a requirement, or it's a condition of the National Endowment for the Arts. To use their funding, we can only grant to those types of nonprofit organizations. Because our commission, with the intention of reaching folks that we haven't served in the past with our grants program, with this grant category, if you are planning to apply for funds in a different grant category, you wouldn't be eligible for any funding in this grant category. This is kind of a unique grant opportunity that is inviting new folks, new organizations, or maybe not new organizations, but organizations we haven't worked with in the past to apply. Now, if you are an arts organization located in Berkeley and you're on this call, you wouldn't be eligible to be the applicant organization for this grant opportunity. But if you were partnering with a non-arts organization and you were going to be the arts provider of the program, you were going to be like the lead, leading the arts and cultural programming, that would be okay, but you would not, your organization would not be able to be the applicant. And just to further outline what types of applicants would not be eligible, you couldn't apply as an individual, a business isn't eligible, any type of school district. And then if you're a social service organization, like a non-arts organization outside of Berkeley, you would not be eligible. And another condition of our NEA funding requirement is that you've got to be eligible to receive federal funds. So if for any reason you are ineligible from receiving funding from the federal government, you would be disqualified from this grant category as well. Okay, so now I want to go over the basic requirements of this grant program. So a portion of this program must be free. If you're also seeking funding from other sources, and this is just a portion, and you're doing something large and it's, part of the program has a fee-based element or is ticketed, that's okay, but a portion of it must be free. The other basic is that the program has to take place in the city of Berkeley. Funded activities need to take place within the grant activity period, and for this grant, it starts July 1st, 2024 and goes through June 30th, 2025. So that's when the grant that you're applying for now needs to occur. And a final report would be due July 30th. That's 30 days after the end of the grant activity period. And you've also got to make sure you abide by the NEA, the National Endowment for the Arts sub-awardee regulations. That list is in the guidelines. I have heard the link is broken. And so I will be investigating that and trying to fix it shortly. But I do want to assure you that we put those kinds of what I would describe as guardrails on our application and guidelines. So they they mirror and closely align with those NEA sub-awardee regulations. So you can be rest assured that if what you're applying for fits within the application, that it's probably also meeting those NEA sub-awardee requirements. That doesn't mean I don't want you to also make sure you look at that document, but just wanted to give you that reassurance. And then if, whether or not you are applying as a non-Arts Berkeley organization or an arts organization outside of Berkeley, you're responsible as a grantee for securing your Berkeley-based venue, the place where the program will occur. That is something you will need to coordinate. All application materials need to be submitted electronically using our submittable grants management system, and all of those materials are due by March 13th at 11:59. Again, there won't be any staff to answer questions after 4:30 p.m. on the day of the deadline, so please plan accordingly based on that information. For this grant category, you can enable collaborators. So more than one submittable account owner could work on the application if you'd like. So if you fall in the category of a non-arts organization applying and you want whomever you are working with as the arts provider to help with the application, you could both work on entering the application answers. I do want to also emphasize that no extensions will be granted for the deadline. So I do highly recommend applying early in case you run into any technical issues, and help through technical assistance is available through this entire application period. The application includes some questions that will require you to enter text and some that will require you to upload files. So you'll need to upload your work samples and support materials if you're a non-arts applicant. You will also need to upload a letter of agreement between your organization and the partnering arts provider. The narrative questions and the budget form will require you to enter the text directly into the application. You'll also need to have your federal employer identification number on hand. That's your federal EIN. And you will enter this number at the beginning during the eligibility check questions. And then Submittable will verify your organization's nonprofit status. So you'll need that number on hand. You also are, there's also a field in the application that asks you for a unique entity identifier, a UEI. That is required by the NEA to receive our funds. It's not necessarily required at the time of application, but if you are awarded, you do have to set up that UEI number before we can grant you the funds. And there are links on how to do that, both in the application and our grant guidelines. I'm not sure how long it takes to get that. I do think that the process is relatively simple. There are additional instructions that say you don't need to have a full registration with the federal government's sam.gov system, but you do need to register and get that unique entity identifier. Okay, so I'll take you through a short submittable tutorial for those who may be new to our this interface that we use. If you are new, you will, on this landing page, go to this tab, the sign up tab, and create your account. But if you already have an account, you can go ahead and use your credentials to sign in. If you've forgotten your password, you can click this forgot link and you can reset your password directly from there. So creating an account is free, but if you do need help with your submittable account specifically, that's something I can't help you with. I don't have access to your account, so I couldn't see that you even have an account unless you've submitted something before to my particular grant programs. So you'll need to contact Submittable's customer support. They mostly have an only web-based where you'll enter your question, you'll type your question into a form, but they usually get back to you within 24 hours. But I just want to give you a heads up, any issues that you run into your Submittable account, you do need to contact them specifically. So I'll go ahead and just quickly switch over to what the application looks like. So when you are clicking, you can click the direct link on our website to apply. It may give you all of our grant programs that are currently open right now, but we're talking tonight about the Arts Program Grant. This link will take you directly to the grant guidelines, and I really, really recommend reading the guidelines before you apply. That's going to provide you all of the information that you need before applying. So in this particular case, I've already entered a test organization with a 501c3, so you can see what it looks like. Okay, so if you want to enable collaborators, so if you want more than one person to work on your application, you will do that by clicking this link here, and then you can invite someone else to contribute to the application. The beginning of your application is going to be a lot of contact information and basic information, this is not going to be scored by the panelists. This auto populates after you enter your EIN. I do want to draw your attention to this section, which is the unique entity identifier. You can go ahead and set one up. It's also something that is free. It doesn't cost anything, but it's not required. As you'll see, most of the fields on this application have a red asterisk, and those are required. You won't be able to submit the application without completing those fields. This one's not required, but again, if you are awarded, you do need to have that unique entity identifier in place before we can issue you the funds. Okay, so again, this is mostly contact information that is not, the panelists will not see this. You are required to have a Berkeley business license number. It's not necessarily due at the time of application, but this is a required field. So if you have one already, that's great, and you can enter it there. If you don't have one quite yet, you can put something like not applicable or NA in this field. But again, if you are awarded, you would need to get that Berkeley license number in place. Here you will indicate what type of organization you are applying as, and that's going to give you specific questions based on what type of organization you are further down in the application. So I have selected that I am a non-arts nonprofit located in Berkeley. And this is that additional upload that you will need to include in your application between your organization and if it's a teaching artist, if it's an arts organization, whoever is the arts provider in your program, you'll upload a letter of agreement between them and your organization. There are specific instructions to include or what to include in your letter of agreement, so please pay attention to that section. And a lot of the application questions do include additional instructions beneath them, so you will want to make sure you are aware of those and are reading those before answering. So again, this top section is not scored. Throughout the application, you will see review criteria, how much of your total score this review criteria is worth, and then the information, the details about what that review criteria mean. And the questions beneath it will correspond to that particular review criteria. For fields where you're entering text, you will see what the word limit is on the bottom right corner of the text field. And as you enter text, you'll see how many words you have left. And again, almost all of these fields are required. So you'll need to enter them before you can submit. This is your project budget form. At the top, you will include your earned income or contributed income. So any income that's going toward this project. And on this side, you can include whether or not that's a projection or if those funds are committed. This is where you'll include the amount that you're requesting for this grant. So if you're requesting the total $5,000 maximum, you will put $5,000 right here. And this is obviously projected because we don't know if you'll get the grant or not. But all of the subtotals and totals will auto calculate for you. And this is where you'll, in this section, the bottom section is where you'll put your expenses. Anything you need to explain about the budget, we'll go in this budget notes. Okay, so then we move on to this new review criterion, and then the questions beneath it will relate to the artistic excellence and artistic merit. This is another example of a place where you will upload files. And then I'll just go ahead and go to the end of the application. You have the option to save draft. I recommend doing that as often as you can. The application will auto-save, as you can see, it's auto-saved a minute ago, but it's always a good idea to check in and press save draft just so you for sure are not losing any work. And then when you are ready to submit the application, you would hit this. And again, it won't let you submit if fields that are required are missing. And then I also want to show you, let's say you're saving the draft and you need to come back to the application. When you come back, you're likely going to see this. And so I don't want you to be alarmed if you see something that says no submissions found. It will look like this if you have never submitted anything on Submittable. But you can find your application in the drafts area. So if you need to come back, you'll find your fiscal year 25 arts program grant and click continue to continue working on your application. If you are not the organization or the person who starts the application, but you have been invited as a collaborator, you'll find your application that you need to work on here. So there is a difference on where you may find your application based on its status, if it's in a draft or if you've submitted it, or if you are a collaborator. And if you are the submitter, if you have submitted the application, you are able to download a PDF of your full application so you can keep that for your records. Okay, so go back to the presentation. Okay, so once the deadline passes, Civic Arts staff will review all the applications for further eligibility and then assign those eligible applications to the grant review panelists. And then panelists will have several weeks to review the applications using the review criteria and the scoring scale, which we'll talk a little bit about in the later slides. And then we will meet virtually over Zoom to discuss each application. And again, if you apply, you will be notified about the status, the eligibility status of your application, and the information about the date and time and the link to the public grant review panel meeting. And then once the panel, the panel meeting concludes, staff will review the scores and come up with funding scenarios, and we will be able to grant $60,000 in this grant category. And the funding scenarios depend on multiple things. So it's going to depend on how many applicants we have, what the applicant request amounts are. So if they're requesting the full amount of the full $5,000, or if they're asking for, let's say, $1,000 for a smaller program, all of that's going to factor into how we are able to come up with those funding scenarios and how many applications get funded. And of course, the final scores also go into that determination as well. The funding scenarios are discussed by the grants subcommittee, and that's a subset of the Civic Arts Commission. and they'll take the final recommendations to the Civic Arts Commission for approval. And that will happen at the Civic Arts Commission meeting. And all Civic Arts Commission meetings are open to the public. And you'll also be notified as an applicant about the date and time and where those funding scenarios will be approved. And then soon after the commission approves those grant awards in late June, the date we talked about, Civic Arts will notify the applicants with acceptance or decline letters. These are the 4 review criteria that panelists will use to evaluate your application. These are included in the grant guidelines as well as the application itself, but I do highly recommend taking some time and becoming very familiar with these, because this is the standards by which your application will be evaluated. And each of these review criteria are weighted in this particular grant category. They're all weighted the same. So each review criteria section is worth 25% of your total application score. And they are, for this grant category, the review criteria are program narrative and timeline, artistic excellence and artistic merit, community engagement and impact, and cultural equity. And this is the scoring scale that panelists will use in conjunction with those review criteria. So they will assign a numerical value to each of the review criteria using this rubric. And then for each panelist, their score for your application will result from those 25% weights. And then all of the panelists who review your application, their scores will be average, and that will result in your final score. So each of these review criteria will get a number 0 through 5 assigned to them, and that's how your scores will be determined. Okay, so some grant writing tips for you. Specificity is key. Be very specific in how you're going to accomplish something, how you're going to get something finished, who's going to be involved. In relationship to that tip, don't assume the panelists know anything about the work that you do, your artistic discipline, any particular venues that you're using. And this is because the panelists reviewing your application may be from anywhere in the Bay Area, and they're coming from all different backgrounds, artistic disciplines. So do keep that in mind when you're framing your application answers. I do also recommend that you start your application early. You could start it right now. You could start it today. The applications are open. I also recommend having someone else review your application answers. Having another set of eyes on your application answers is going to benefit you, because if it's clear to someone who doesn't know your work or isn't you, then there's a likelihood that it will be clear to the panelists. I also want to recommend using the description fields that are connected to the work sample file upload. So once you upload a work sample, you'll be given some additional fields where you can enter things like the year the work sample was produced, and optional instructions for the panelists. And you'll want to use those so you're directing panelists directly where you want them to pay attention to your work sample. And this is something to keep in mind, especially when you are uploading maybe large files. If it's a large, let's say, PDF document that's over 100 pages, but you want to direct them to something very specific, say, please look at pages 10 through 11 in those instructions. Or if it's a video file, please pay attention to the first 3 minutes. And that is because the panelists will probably spend, they will be instructed to spend no more than 10 minutes total on looking at your work sample specifically. They will take a longer time to look at the whole application, but for your work sample specifically, they will probably be spending a total of 10 minutes. So you want to make sure that they're looking at the specific areas of your work samples that you want them to look at. In relationship to starting your application early, do not wait to the last minute to submit the application, because we cannot accommodate for any hardware, software, or internet issues that you may have on the day of the deadline, and no extensions will be given. There is almost a 10-week application period for you to get your application, to work on your application. So please utilize that time to start and complete your application early. There are several ways that you can get help with your application, but first and foremost, I do recommend reading the guidelines, because you'll likely find answers to your questions in that document. You can also check out a frequently asked questions document on our website. You can email me directly, or you can schedule a virtual 15-minute appointment for an audio or video call over Zoom. The image that you're seeing on the left is the Calendly interface, and that's what I use to schedule these consultations. There are links to my Calendly scheduler in the on our website and in the guidelines. Let's see. I do also want to let you know that even though I can answer any questions you have about the application, I can't read any of your application answers and then give you feedback. So we can talk verbally through any questions you have, but I can't read your application and give you any feedback about it. We don't have any sample applications available either. So just letting you know that in advance. And then again, if you need specific help with your submittable account, you'll need to contact customer service, Submittables customer service through that link, and they can help you really quickly. Okay, well, this concludes the presentation portion of the webinar. My contact information is on the left. And again, if you need any technical assistance, there are so many resources available on our website. And that's also where you can find the link to apply. You'll find the link to our portal to access the actual application on our website. So at this time, I'll go ahead and stop recording, and we can get to